Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. For 3 days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice telling me to understand. I kept asking myself what exactly I was supposed to understand. That my sacrifices meant less? That being dependable had somehow become my punishment. I went through my normal routine, but everything felt different. At work, I answered emails and smiled when people spoke to me, while my mind stayed somewhere else. I kept thinking about Saturday and why my father suddenly wanted everyone together. Brennan seemed strangely relaxed when I saw him at our mother's house. He talked about the future as if nothing had happened. He even joked about finally having enough space for his thing. I smiled politely and said nothing. That evening, Mom called me. Her voice sounded nervous. She asked if I was still coming to the meeting. I told her yes. She was quiet for several seconds before saying, "Alara, please don't make things worse." I almost laughed. Somehow, I was still being asked to protect everyone else's feelings. I told her I wasn't going there to fight. I simply wanted the truth. Then I opened the drawer beside my desk and took out every paper I had saved over the year. I didn't know yet what they would mean, but something inside me said I should bring them. Saturday was no longer a family meeting to me. It was the moment I would finally stop being silent. When I was growing up, I never thought of Brennan as spoiled. It happened so slowly that I accepted it as normal. If he made a mistake, Dad found a way to fix it. If I made one, Dad expected me to learn from it. Brennan once bought an expensive truck he could not afford. Dad quietly helped him make the payments. Another time, Brennan started a small business, spent too much money, and walked away when it failed. Dad called it a lesson and welcomed him home a few months later. I had a different role in the family. I was the one who stayed calm and handled problems. When I was 24, I had plans to move to another state for a better job. Then Dad called and told me the company was struggling. He needed help with invoices, suppliers, and unpaid accounts. I gave up my plans and spent months working late without asking for money. Dad kept telling me, "The family will remember this." I believed him. Then Brennan came back from another failed career attempt. Dad gave him a management position almost immediately. I was happy for my brother at first, but something inside me had changed. When Dad later announced that Brennan would receive the family property and control of the company, I finally asked, "What am I getting?" Dad looked at me and said, "You don't need what Brennan needs." Mom stared at the floor. I left without arguing. That night, I started looking through old company records. Soon, I noticed several important documents were missing from the files I had always been allowed to see. The missing papers bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I started checking what I could find without asking Dad any questions. I spoke with a few people who had worked at the company for years. Most were careful with their words, but one name kept coming up: Wesley Rusk. Wesley had been the company accountant for decades before retiring. I called him and asked if he would meet me. At first, he sounded unsure, but he agreed to see me at a small diner. Wesley listened as I explained what had happened. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Alara, your father didn't build everything with his own money." He explained that years ago, money from a family trust had helped the company expand. The trust had been created by my grandmother, Lenora. According to Wesley, it was meant to benefit both Brennan and me equally. I had never heard about any trust. Wesley looked uncomfortable when he admitted that Gideon had handled most of the paperwork. Before we left, he handed me an old financial statement he had kept among his personal records. The numbers raised more questions than answers. They showed that some assets connected to the company had a history I knew nothing about. Then I remembered signing papers years earlier, when Dad told me they were routine company documents. What if they were not routine at all? I decided not to confront him. I needed facts first. That evening, I returned to my childhood bedroom and searched through old boxes. Behind a stack of school papers, I found a small locked metal box. I stared at it for several seconds. I had no idea what was inside, but I knew Dad had never wanted me to find it. The small key was taped beneath the box. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Inside were papers I had never seen before. There were old partnership agreements, property records, letters, and several handwritten pages from Grandma Lenora. I read her letters slowly. One of them stopped me cold. She wrote that she worried Dad might someday give everything to Brennan. She also wrote that she trusted me to protect what the family had built because I had always taken responsibility seriously. I had to put the letter down for him. Grandma had died years earlier. Yet somehow she had seen the problem coming. I kept reading until I found my name on an ownership agreement connected to a large commercial property. I had no idea I had any connection to it. Another document showed the property was worth several $1,000,000. Dad had always spoken about it as if it belonged completely to him. I took pictures of the papers and called Wesley. He gave me the name of an attorney he trusted, Naomi Mercer. Naomi met me the next morning. She read every document carefully and asked several questions about my family and the company. She told me that the papers could give me legal rights, but she needed to verify how the property had been handled over the years. Then she looked at me seriously. "Do not confront your father yet." I asked why. She said the family meeting could be designed to make me sign away those rights. That I finally understood why Dad wanted everyone there on Saturday, that I agreed to stay quiet. Naomi closed the folder and said, "Whatever happens Saturday, don't sign anything." After Dad's announcement, Brennan changed quickly. He started acting like the company already belonged completely to him. He changed schedules, made expensive purchases, and gave orders to employees who had worked there longer than he had. When one manager questioned him, Brennan told him that things were different now. One afternoon, Brennan stopped by my place. He looked around my small apartment and smiled. "You really should stop being bitter, Alara. Dad is doing what's best for the family." I asked him what he meant. He laughed and said I had never built anything important enough to deserve the same share as him. I wanted to answer, but I remembered Naomi's warning, so I stayed calm. I noticed Brennan carrying a folder filled with papers. He said they were for Saturday's meeting. That night, Mom called me. She sounded nervous. She asked me not to embarrass the family during the meeting. I asked her directly, "Did you know about Grandma's trust?" She was silent. Then she admitted she had known something about it. She said Dad had told her not to interfere because he was trying to protect Brennan. I felt something inside me break. Mom had watched all of this happen and stayed quiet. Naomi called the next day with more information. She had found financial records showing Brennan had already made decisions that could put the company in serious trouble. He had taken money from the business for several purchases without properly explaining them. I stopped thinking about simply getting my share. I wanted the truth exposed. I placed every document into one folder and kept it beside me. That Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. Dad had sent one sentence: "Come prepared to sign." By noon, everyone was sitting around Dad's dining table. Brennan looked relaxed, almost amused. He seemed sure I would complain for a few minutes and then accept whatever Dad decided. Gideon placed several documents in front of him. He explained that Brennan would officially take control of the company and receive the property connected to the family arrangement. Then he turned toward me. "Alara, you've always been the sensible one. I know you'll understand." Brennan leaned back in his chair. "You should be grateful Dad even included you in this meeting." I looked at the papers without touching them. Dad pushed one toward me. "Sign this. It confirms that you have no further claims against the estate or the company." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. I slowly looked around the table. "Is everyone finished?" Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" "I brought something too." I reached into my bag and placed my folder on the table. The mood changed immediately. I opened it and pulled out the first document. "This is Grandma Lenora's trust agreement." Dad's face became tense. Brennan stopped smiling. I explained that the trust had been created to protect the interests of both grandchildren. The commercial property was connected to that arrangement, so it could not simply be treated as Dad's personal property. "You don't understand these documents," Dad said. I opened another page and pushed it toward him. "Then maybe you can explain your signature." He stared at the page without speaking. Brennan leaned forward, confused. I placed Wesley's old financial statement beside it. It showed that Dad had known about my ownership interest years earlier. The room went completely silent. I finally understood why Dad had been so desperate for me to sign. I kept my voice steady as I explained what I had found. I told them the property records did not match the way Dad had described the family assets. Several things he had treated as completely his were connected to agreements that included my name. Brennan looked at the papers again. His confidence was fading. "So what does this mean?" he asked. Dad immediately blamed the accountants and lawyers. He said they had handled old paperwork badly and that he had trusted them. Naomi had already warned me about that excuse. I told Dad that the documents were too clear to ignore. Then I told him what hurt me most. I had spent years helping him because I believed him when he said my sacrifices mattered. I never expected money for helping my own family. I expected honesty. Dad shook his head. "I never forced you to help." I looked at him. "No, Dad, you didn't. I helped because I loved you. That's why lying to me hurt so much." Mom suddenly started crying. She admitted she had known Dad planned to give Brennan more. She said she kept quiet because she believed I would be strong enough to survive it. I felt numb. Hearing that from my mother hurt in a way I could not explain. Brennan stood up angrily. "You're all trying to take away what Dad promised me." I answered quietly. "It was never yours to take." For the first time, nobody defended him. The room filled with years of anger, silence, and painful truths. Then Dad reached into the folder. "There's one more document," he said. His voice had changed. "And if Alara refuses to cooperate, this company could be in serious trouble." Dad placed the last document in front of us. It showed the company was carrying heavy financial obligations. Some came from the recent expansion, while others were connected to purchases Brennan had made after getting more control. Brennan stared at the numbers. "How bad is it?" he asked. Dad avoided his eyes. "Bad enough." I looked at the paperwork and understood what Dad had been planning. The commercial property was supposed to secure new financing. Without it, Brennan could struggle to keep the company running. Dad turned toward me. "That's why you need to sign the release. We need your cooperation." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. After everything that had happened, he still wanted me to solve the problem. He had not simply chosen Brennan over me. He had expected me to clean up Brennan's mistakes too. I called Naomi and explained the situation. Her answer was simple. "You are not responsible for saving a business from choices you did not make." I looked back at Dad. "I'm not signing." Brennan became angry. "You're being selfish." I stayed calm. "You were handed everything without being asked to earn it. Now you want me to risk what belongs to me so you can keep it." Dad asked what I wanted. I gave him one condition. Any agreement had to recognize my legal ownership and protect the employees who depended on the company. I would not destroy the business, but I would no longer sacrifice myself to protect people who had betrayed me. Brennan called me heartless. Dad said nothing. He simply stared at me, as if he was seeing a stranger. For the first time, he understood that the daughter who always obeyed him was gone. The weeks after the meeting were difficult, but I stayed focused. Naomi handled the legal work and began negotiations for a new structure that would protect the company without giving Brennan unchecked control. I made one thing clear from the beginning. I wanted only what the original agreements gave me. I did not want extra money, another house, or anything that was not rightfully mine. That decision surprised Brennan. He had expected me to fight for every dollar I could get. Because of his own financial choices, Brennan had to sell several unnecessary assets and take responsibility for debts connected to his spending. Dad also lost the power to make every major decision alone. A professional management team was brought in, and my ownership was formally recognized under the old agreements. For the first time, the employees seemed able to breathe. People who had worked there for years no longer had to worry about Brennan making careless decisions. Maribel came to see me one evening. She apologized for staying silent for so long. She admitted that keeping peace had meant allowing me to be hurt. I accepted her apology, but I told her forgiveness would not make everything return to the way it had been. Dad struggled the most. He kept waiting for me to ask whether he was proud of me. Instead, I told him, "I don't need you to decide my worth anymore." Brennan finally understood that everything he received had never proved he was better or more loved. Dad had simply protected him from consequence. Then, months later, I received a letter from Dad that he wanted to meet me alone. I met Dad at a quiet diner on a Tuesday afternoon. I chose the place because I did not want another conversation inside the house where I had spent years feeling like the less important child. Dad looked tired when he sat across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I made a terrible mistake, Alara." He admitted he had always been afraid Brennan would fail without his help. Every time Brennan made a mistake, Dad gave him another chance. Every time I succeeded, Dad assumed I would be fine on my own. He looked down at his coffee. "Your strength became my excuse to neglect you." Those words hurt, but I let him finish. I told him that being the strong child never gave him permission to hurt me. I had needed a father too, not just someone who expected me to handle everything. Dad apologized. He did not ask me to fix the family or pretend nothing had happened. I told him trust would take time. It would have to come from his actions, not promises. My relationship with Mom slowly improved too, but I kept boundaries that protected my peace. Brennan began taking responsibility for his own decisions. He was still learning, but for once, Dad was not rushing in to save him. I continued helping with the company when necessary, but I stopped being the person everyone called whenever something went wrong. I built a life that belonged to me. My greatest revenge was not taking everything from Brennan. It was refusing to let their betrayal control my future. They spent my whole life telling me to understand why my brother deserved more. At the family meeting, I finally understood something else. I deserved to stop accepting less.